Did he? Wow. 3 words, a pause. Then a slow, almost amused smile spreading across the face of a prime minister who holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Harvard, a master's degree in economics from Oxford, and a PhD in economics from Oxford, being told by a Toronto Star reporter that Pierre Poilievre had just publicly called him badly educated in economics. That moment, unscripted, unrehearsed, completely natural, tells you more about the current state of Canadian politics than any press release, any poll, or any parliamentary speech could. Because it wasn't clever political theater engineered by a communications team. It wasn't a prepared zinger road tested in a W.R. room. It was the genuine, unguarded reaction of someone who has just been told something so disconnected from observable reality that the only honest response is to pause, raise an eyebrow W, and simply say, wow. It is the reaction of someone who is not worried. And in politics, few things communicate power more clearly than the absence of visible worry when your opponent attacks. And that reaction, more than any formal rebuttal, any policy document, or any parliamentary exchange, captured in a single expression the enormous and widening gap between where Mark Carney is operating right now and what Pierre Poilievre has decided his opposition strategy is going to look like. This is the story of that gap, of what Poilievre has been doing across the past week, of how Carney has responded in press conferences, in question period, and through the quiet, compounding momentum of results that speak louder than any individual exchange, of what the latest polls and the floor crossings and the internal conservative unrest all add up to, and of why the political playbook Poilievre has reached for is not just failing, political decline in real time in front of a country that is watching closely. Before we get into it, subscribe to Canada Today for daily coverage of the decisions shaping Canada's future right now. To understand what has unfolded this week, you have to understand the corner Pierre Poilievre has painted here. Because this is a man who, just over a year ago, looked like the inevitable next Prime Minister of Canada. In late 2024, the Conservatives held a polling lead of 20 to 25 points over the Liberals. Justin Trudeau was politic. Armament looked finished. The election felt like a formality, and the formality felt like it was going to deliver Poilievre to Rideau Cottage with a comfortable majority. Then Donald Trump came back to the White House. Then Trudeau resigned. Then the Liberals chose Mark Carney, a former governor of 2 of the world's most consequential centra. Hell Banks, a man whose career had been built not in the arena of political performance, but in the rooms where actual economic crises are managed. A man with global credibility, a steady and measure, temperament under pressure, and precisely the profile that Canadians felt they needed to navigate a world suddenly defined by an aggressive, tariff-wielding American president threatening to annex their county. Try and erase their identity as a sovereign nation. The election came, Carney won. Poilievre not only lost the national vote, but lost his own seat in Ottawa, a riding he had held for 20 years, retreating afterward to a safe Conservative seat in Alberta. He had led the party to a 4th consecutive federal election defeat, squandering what had been one of the most commanding polling leads in modern Canadian political history. It's over the Liberals. Justin Trudeau was politic. Armament looked finished. The election felt like a formality, and the formality felt like it was going to deliver Poilievre to Rideau Cottage with a comfortable majority. Then Donald Trump came back to the White House. Then Trudeau resigned. Then the Liberals chose Mark Carney, a former governor of 2 of the world's most consequential centra. Hell Banks, a man whose career had been built not in the arena of political performance, but in the rooms where actual economic crises are managed. A man with global credibility, a steady and measure, temperament under pressure, and precisely the profile that Canadians felt they needed to navigate a world suddenly defined by an aggressive, tariff-wielding American president threatening to annex their county. Try and erase their identity as a sovereign nation. The election came, Carney won. Poilievre not only lost the national vote, but lost his own seat in Ottawa, a riding he had held for 20 years, retreating afterward to a safe Conservative seat in Alberta. He had led the party to a 4th consecutive federal election defeat, squandering what had been one of the most commanding polling leads in modern Canadian political history. They basically threatened any ship moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Vance's framing, too, can play at that game, is the stated logic of the blockade. If Iran will operate Hormuz as a toll booth and a political filter, America will operate it as nothing at all until Iran agrees to operate it as an international waterway. The Pentagon's unthinkable action is the counterweapon that mirrors the weapon Iran built. Here is why Saudi Arabia's pipeline move is more important than anything happening in the Strait right now. Iran's entire negotiating strategy was built on one assumption, that closing Hormuz would cause so much economic pain that America would eventually give Iran what it wants. Sanctions lifted, nuclear program protected, Hormuz under Iranian control. Iran thought it had the world hostage. But Saudi Arabia's pipeline move undermined that strategy. Because if oil can flow without going through Hormuz, Iran's leverage shrinks. Every barrel that flows through the petroline is one less barrel that the world desperately needs through Hormuz. Every barrel that flows through Adcop reduces Iran's bargaining power. CNN reported there are about 400 loaded oil tankers in the Gulf waiting to get out, but the pipeline routes are providing crucial relief to global markets while those tankers wait. And now, with America's naval blockade starting today, the pipeline strategy becomes even more critical. Trump announced America will blockade all ships entering or leaving Iranian ports. Targeting Iran's oil exports completely. Saudi Arabia's pipeline gives the world an alternative supply route. Iran gets squeezed from both sides, America blockading Iranian exports, Saudi Arabia bypassing the strait entirely. The economic pressure on Tehran has never been higher. But there is one risk that nobody in mainstream media is covering. What happens if Iran targets the pipeline? Iran has already conducted drone strikes on Duqm and Salalah, alternative shipping ports in Oman that ships were using to bypass Hormuz. Iran has shown it is willing to attack infrastructure beyond Hormuz. The petroline runs 750 miles across Saudi Arabia. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be moved. And Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has already threatened to open new fronts in places where the enemy is most vulnerable. A pipeline running across open desert, pumping 7 million barrels per day, is exactly the kind of target that changes the war if it gets hit. One successful Iranian drone strike on the petroline would collapse Saudi Arabia's bypass strategy instantly, spike oil prices back toward $150 per barrel overnight, potentially drag Saudi Arabia into direct military conflict, and turn a U.S.-Iran war into a Gulf-wide catastrophe. This is the specific risk that Saudi Arabia's pipeline strategy carries, and why the next few weeks are the most dangerous of this entire conflict. Saudi Arabia did something huge. While America negotiated and threatened, Saudi Arabia built an economic escape route for the entire world. 750 miles of pipeline, 7 million barrels per day, quietly turned on at full power while nobody was watching. It reduced Iran's leverage, it stabilized global oil markets, it gave the world's economy a lifeline, but it also created a new target. And Iran, desperate, blockaded, and under maximum economic pressure, is now looking at that pipeline the same way it looked at those ships in the strait. The next 48 hours will tell us whether Saudi Arabia's quiet power holds, or becomes the next flashpoint in a war that keeps finding new ways to escalate. Subscribe right now, because we cover every development as it happens. Hit subscribe, hit the bell. I will see you in the next one. While the world was watching America and Iran fight over the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia was quietly doing something nobody expected. Not a military move, not a diplomatic statement, a pipeline. A 750-mile pipeline running across the Saudi desert, that just became the most important piece of infrastructure on planet Earth. And when Saudi Arabia turned it on at full power, it changed everything. The world's oil supply, the war's economics, Iran's leverage, all of it shifted in one move that nobody in Washington saw coming. This is the story of how Saudi Arabia played the smartest card of this entire war. Subscribe right now, because this is the angle nobody else is covering. Now, let's get into it. To understand what Saudi Arabia did, you need to understand the problem first. On February 28th, America and Israel attacked Iran. Iran's response was immediate. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. The strait carries 20 million barrels of oil per day, roughly 20% of global seaborne oil trade, primarily from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iraq, and Qatar. All of it blocked overnight. Oil prices exploded. Global benchmark. Brent crude rallied to nearly $120 a barrel at the start of the conflict. The Gulf states were in crisis. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, suddenly could not export its oil. 400 loaded oil tankers were stuck inside the Gulf, waiting, going nowhere. Every day the strait stayed closed, Saudi Arabia lost billions. The world economy was bleeding, and everyone was looking at America and Iran, waiting for a deal. But Saudi Arabia did not wait. Most people have never heard of the petroline, but right now, it is the most important pipeline on Earth. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, known as Petroline, is a roughly 750-mile system that transports crude across Saudi Arabia, connecting the oil-rich eastern Gulf Coast to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea. This pipeline was built decades ago, specifically for this kind of emergency, a way to bypass the Strait of Hormuz completely. No Iran, no IRGC, no blockade, just oil flowing west, across the desert, to the Red Sea, and straight to the world. And here is what Saudi Arabia did that nobody expected. Where the east-west pipeline had been transferring an average of 770,000 barrels per day in January and February, Saudi Arabia cranked it up to its full capacity of 7 million barrels per day by the end of March. 7 million barrels per day, almost 10 times the normal flow. In just 1 month, Saudi Arabia quietly rerouted its entire oil export system away from the Strait of Hormuz. No press conference, no announcement, no drama, just oil flowing, while the world was watching the war. And Saudi Arabia was not alone. The UAE activated its Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, known as AIDCOP, which allows crude exports to bypass the strait via the port of Fujairah on the Arabian Sea. 2 pipelines, 2 countries, both routing oil away from Iran's blockade. Together, these 2 pipelines were partially replacing the 20 million barrels per day that normally flow through Hormuz. Not completely, but enough to stabilize global markets, enough to prevent the full economic catastrophe that a complete Hormuz closure would have produced. Energy analysts at Kepler confirmed Saudi Arabia and the UAE are already increasing utilization of pipelines that bypass the strait. This is what strategic infrastructure looks like in action, built years ago, maintained quietly, activated in the exact moment the world needed it. And America had not planned for this. Trump was focused on the military solution, the blockade, the negotiations, the threats. Saudi Arabia was focused on the economic solution, the pipeline, the rerouting, the quiet victory. For 6 weeks, the world watched the Strait of Hormuz stay close-ed and assumed that only one thing could open it. An American military operation, a NATO naval force, some kind of over-W helming Western pressure that would force Iran to back down. That was the assumption in Washington. That was the assumption in London, and Brussels, and Tokyo. Everyone was poking at the same playbook. The one where America solves the problem with force or the threat of force and the world goes back to normal. But Saudi Arabia was quietly doing something that no one in Washington had anticipated, that no intelligence briefing had flagged as a serious possibility, and that when it became clear what had actually happened, left American officials scrambling to understand the implications of a move they had not seen coming and could not have stopped EV-N if they had. Saudi Arabia did not fire a missile. It did not deploy a fleet. It did not make a dramatic announcement or call a press conference. It met a deal. A specific, calculated, and extraordinarily consequential deal that removed the central obstacle keeping the Strait of Hormuz close-ed, and did it in a way that shifted the balance of power in the Middle East more permanently than anything that has happened in this conflict so far. The communication that ended the Strait of Hormuz crisis did not come from Washington. It did not come from the Pakistani mediation team whose 4-component demand framework had been the operational diplomatic instrument for managing every previous IRGC interception incident since the ceasefire framework took effect. It did not come from any of the channels that the American national security apparatus had been working through in the 48 hours following the Minerva Luna's 0431 radar contact with 4 IRGC patrol vessels. The most bizarre headline of this entire war is the one that nobody seems to have noticed is bizarre. Donald Trump, the president who spent 6 weeks demanding that Iran open the Strait of Hormuz, who threatened to blow up the whole civilization if Iran did not open the Strait of Hormuz, who sent J.D. Vance to Pakistan for 21 hours specifically to get Iran to agree to open the Strait of Hormuz, just announced that the United States will be blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Trump is blockading the strait that he demanded Iran open. Iran is the country that everyone said was blockading the strait that Trump demanded Iran open. And now both of them are blockading it simultaneously. CNN Business captured the paradox with unusual bluntness. Trump is threatening to close off a strait that he has repeatedly told Iran must be reopened unconditionally. This is the moment the war logic completed its inversion. Iran closed Hormuz. America is now closing Hormuz. The question of who opens it and on whose terms. It is what 43 days of war, 1 ceasefire, and 1 21-hour failed negotiation in Pakistan have produced. And at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, April 13th, the American blockade begins. On April 11th, 2026, at a moment when J.D. Vance was sitting across a table from Abbas Araghchi in Islamabad, and the whole world was watching whether diplomacy would produce a settlement, 2 American warships did something that had not happened since the first bomb fell on February 28th. They turned on their automatic identification systems. Not by accident. You do not throw AIS on by accident on a Navy ship. That is the judgment of Campbell University professor Salvatore Mercoliano, who specializes in military and maritime history. It is purposeful, it is deliberate, it is a ship telling every maritime tracking system on Earth exactly where it is, on which frequency, in real time. The USS Frankie Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy, both Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, transited the Strait of Hormuz with their identification systems broadcasting to every vessel, every Coast Guard installation, every satellite, every maritime operator in the world. They were not hiding. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the world to know they had crossed. And the Iran that had held the world's most important energy corridor closed for 43 days, the Iran that had told the world the strait would never return to normal, the Iran that had fired missiles at the destroyer's radio challenges as they approached, that Iran did not fire. The ships crossed. They are in the Persian Gulf. And the mine-clearing operation that is the real story, the one that reveals exactly how badly Iran's own trap has backfired, has begun. U.S. intelligence says China is planning to provide new air defense weaponry to Iran in the coming weeks. China, arming Iran, while America blockades Iran. Trump responded immediately. Think about what that means. America versus Iran, already a massive war. China entering on Iran's side. That is a superpower confrontation. That is not a regional conflict anymore. Iran has 3 options right now. Vance left the door open. We leave here with a very simple proposal. Our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. If Iran accepts, blockade ends, war ends, deal done, probability low. Iran's new supreme leader cannot surrender under military pressure without losing everything domestically. Iran attacks American warships directly. America responds with full military force. The war escalates beyond anything we have seen so far. Probability possible. Iran's supreme leader already threatened this. Iran does nothing. Absorbs the economic pain, waits for America's domestic political pressure to build. Gas prices at $5, $6. Americans angry. Trump's approval drops. Iran knows American patience has limits. Probability, most likely in the short term. America has blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's oil is cut off completely. China may be entering the war on Iran's side. Oil prices are exploding toward $120 per barrel. And Trump has warned that anyone who fires will be blown to hell. This is not a movie. This is happening right now, today, this morning. The next 48 hours will determine whether this becomes a deal or the beginning of something the world has never seen before. If you want to understand every development as it happens, subscribe right now. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Because the world is changing faster than anyone can keep up with. And I will keep up with it. For you. See you in the next one. Here is why Saudi Arabia's pipeline move is more important than anything happening in the Strait right now. Iran's entire negotiating strategy was built on one assumption, that closing Hormuz would cause so much economic pain that America would eventually give Iran what it wants. Sanctions lifted, nuclear program protected, Hormuz under Iranian control. Iran thought it had the world hostage. But Saudi Arabia's pipeline move undermined that strategy, because if oil can flow without going through Hormuz,